Bible School Radio, 91.3 KDKR, Decatur, Dallas, Fort Worth, and on 91.3 KYJC, Commerce.
Portions of KDKR programming do not necessarily reflect the views of this station, its management, or staff.
Prudent Money with Bob Brooks is sponsored by the Prudent Money Foundation on 91.3.
Well, is inflation showing signs of letting up? Today we're going to take a look. Stay tuned for Prudent Money. Good afternoon, this is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. Thank you so much for joining me today. You know I do appreciate it. Hey, if you got a question, I've got a way for you to get some answers. Just go to the website at www.prudentmoney.com. Send a question in through the email that's at the top of the page, and I'll get you taken care of. If you need a little bit more than an email support, you can always schedule some time on my calendar, and we can have a phone call, and I can answer any questions that you have that way. So there's a couple ways to get information, all at the website, www.prudentmoney.com. Before we get started today, and I've got a lot to talk to you about inflation, maybe even get into a little bit on Social Security, but I first want to talk about the two most important numbers that you need to know when it comes to reaching retirement. And I want to suggest that this is even, really any time along the way, it's important to know these numbers, but especially if you're 5 years and as much as 10 years out, you definitely need to know these two numbers. The first one is not how you're invested, not what you're invested in. None of that matters as much as what growth rate do you need to succeed in retirement. What is that growth rate? When I say growth rate, that simply means what do you need to average on a year-to-year basis for your investments to grow at to get you where you need to be at retirement. Now, of course, that's assuming that you have some other numbers lined up as well, like exactly how much money that you're going to take out at retirement, that kind of thing. So what's that growth rate look like? So is it, you could grow it at 4%, you could grow it at 6%, might even take 8%. Yikes. Might take 10%. We'll talk about that. Might want to rethink that. But what is that growth rate? Because hand in hand with that growth rate comes your risk level. So if you told me that your risk level is very low, but yet you need 7% to get you on an average to get you to retirement, well, there's a discrepancy there because you can't have, it'd be tough to get a 7% return, to do what you need to do to get a 7% return and have a risk level that's low. Maybe the answer is more like a 4 to 5% risk growth rate for a risk level that's low. So it's so very important to know your growth rate. And in fact, the best way that when talking to a new client, the best place to start is not with how we're invested and what kind of investments we would use and what the strategy is. It's all about if you're looking at needing a growth rate of 6%, maybe 7%, 5%, whatever it is, what kind of investments do you need and what kind of strategy do you need to go along with that will help you get that rate of return? That's the goal, is to get that rate of return. And do those investments match up with your risk level? It all comes into it has to all work together. One of the things that you can do, you've heard me talk about it, but I continue to want to bring it up because I think it's a great resource we've got at prudentmoney.com, and it's the risk survey. Now you can go on the website, take the risk survey. It will take you 5 minutes max, and you'll get sent to you a risk analysis that tells you what your risk level is, and give you some options and some things to consider. Now, there are 4 different levels of risk that you could be at. You could be at a growth level, which is your highest. You could be at a moderate risk level. You could be conservative. And then safe money. And safe money is where you have guaranteed interest rates. Fortunately, those are fairly high, especially considering to the past. So go take that. It takes about 24, 48 hours to turn it around. And there's no cost or obligation or anything like that. But it's great information to know, and especially if you're working with somebody who is managing or investing your money for you, you might want to check with them. Say, hey, are you in line with what my risk level is? Because this is my risk level. Because a lot of times, and I find this kind of wrong with the system, is that the question will be asked, what's your risk level? And the answer will be, well, I'm a 5 or I'm a 6 or I'm a 7, whatever it might be. And the financial advisor goes, great, write that down, and we'll consider that when we do put your investments together. And there's not any discussion as to, well, what does it mean to be a 6? What does it mean to be a 7 or a 5 or a 4? And most of the time, what the client or the investor thinks it is, and what the advisor thinks it is 2 different numbers, 2 different definitions. So definitely something that you want to keep in mind as you go forward. So go check that out. That's all at the website www.prudentmoney.com. Well, we've been talking a lot about inflation, a lot about interest rates, because that is a very key component. Both of those issues are big key components going forward as we get close to the elections and beyond, really. And as investors are so preoccupied with one question, will the Fed lower interest rates, cut interest rates, decrease interest rates? I think they're missing the bigger picture. And that is, and this was a letter that I wrote to my clients today. I titled it, Is Inflation Over? And yesterday and today we had some inflation numbers come in, and it supports my theory, which I'll go through here in a minute, that I do think, you may think I'm crazy, but hear me out, that inflation is somewhat over, and what that means. Let's talk a little bit about inflation data that's come through for the last couple of days. The May report for the Consumer Price Index showed consumer prices had no increase for the first time in almost 2 years. Now, prior to that, we haven't seen big moves in the inflation rate. They've been pretty stagnant, kind of moving in a real tight range. The Producer Price Indexes were reported this morning. That dropped 0.2% last month, which was a good sign. U.S. wholesale prices fell in May for the second time in 3 months. So everything is going the right direction. But what ends up happening is that inflation levels out, historically what it would do, it would go up quickly and it would drop quickly. And what we've seen is it go up fairly quick and then drop a little bit and then kind of level off. And that's where we've been. So at some point, we come to the conclusion that inflation can't go much higher. It's where it's gone as low as it's going to go. And that is kind of the point. Are we there to where inflation is gone as low as it's going to go? Now, granted, you might be thinking, but Bob, food prices are still high. Restaurants are still expensive. But it may be that the reality is inflation is going to run higher. The normal inflation rate is going to run higher than it has in the past. And I think that that's what we're seeing, and that is somewhat of a problem, mainly or two reasons. The first issue is that consumers are, you got I guess basically three types of consumers. You have consumers that are just barely hanging on. You've got consumers who are hanging on but don't have any room for any extra. And you've got your wealthy consumers who are not having any problems at all. But everybody hates inflation. At some point, that this doesn't leave much room for error, and it starts to mount and become a problem for the economy. But we come to a point where we definitely level off, and that is the question: are we there right now? So it affects the consumer, and that's a problem. It also affects the markets, because the markets have different expectations for lower interest rates, and we may not be getting them. We'll talk a little bit more about that on the other side. This is Bob Brooks. Stick around. Up against a break. We'll be right back. Hello, this is Bob Brooks. Proverbs 22:3 and Proverbs 27:12 are the exact same verse word for word. I call them the stewardship verses of risk. A prudent person foresees danger and takes precautions. The simpleton goes blindly on and suffers the consequences. On the Prudent Money Radio Show, we teach about risk, how to identify it, how to figure it out, and what to do about it. We believe that to be a prudent steward, you have to be a good risk manager. Listen to the Prudent Money Radio Show on Bible School Radio 91.3. Prudent Money, home of the modern-day steward movement.
Some people believe that by observing certain religious rituals, they can confirm their own salvation. But are religious rituals necessary to be saved? Friday on The Verdict, we'll see what Scripture teaches about the place of these religious observances. I'm John Monroe. Join us for this important message, Friday on The Verdict.
The Verdict, weekday mornings at 10:30, here on Bible School Radio, KDKR.
Hi, I'm Jan Markell, host of Understanding the Times. We're very excited to be a part of Bible School Radio. I hope you will join me Saturday, 10 a.m., for cutting-edge guests and the latest information to help you discern the truth, even the inconvenient truth. We'll help you understand our times and contend for the faith. That's Understanding the Times, Saturday at 10 a.m., right here on Bible School Radio, or anytime at olivetreeviews.org.
Welcome back. This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. Thank you so much for joining me today. You know I do appreciate it. If you got a question, please go to the website, www.prudentmoney.com. Send it in, and I will get it taken care of for you. That's off the website, www.prudentmoney.com. I was talking about the second problem is with investor and consumer expectations. And one expectation is that mortgage rates will fall. And I'm thinking that people have set in their minds that mortgage rates are going to fall back to where they were when all this started. And you got to remember, economic times were much, much, much more different than they are today. Interest rate levels were near zero. And so, you had mortgage rates at the 3 point something percent. I mean, they were very, 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 very low. Remember, the average interest rate since 1971, the historic average, 7.41%. And I think that we're going to see a much higher interest rate, and we may be with mortgage rates as good as it gets. And this leads me to the Fed. If the Fed were to cut interest rates, and that's the only way that, really the only way that they're going to get interest rates or inflation down low enough to be where the markets want it, it really would cause them to need to raise interest rates. And it's not going to happen. Lower interest rates may create more inflation. I don't think that's going to happen either. So that's why I think we're kind of where we're going to be. So take that as you wish. One of the things I was thinking about is the one blessing is that gas has not been a huge factor. And if you would have had price of oil has been no factor really. It's been so low. Those are typically a couple of variables that really do lead the numbers up when it comes to inflation, and we haven't really had to worry about that. Let's see. We also had initial jobless claims today. I think that media is making a little bit bigger news out of this than it actually is. This is the number of people who file for unemployment benefits, which would assume that they just were laid off. So typically you get in the upper 100,000 people per week. This one was 242,000, and the headline was initial jobless claims surged by 13,000. That's not really what you call surge. 50 to 100,000 more than expected would be a surge. But that's just the media for you. That's the highest level of claims since last August. And I thought Jerome Powell, who's our Federal Reserve chair, said it perfectly. He said, if inflation falls quickly, we will be prepared to act to cut interest rates. If anybody's listening in the market and not hearing what they want to hear, but hearing what he's saying, he's exactly right. If inflation were to drastically quickly fall, which is highly unlikely, then they'll act to cut interest rates. So a very, very low chance. One analyst said Chairman Powell was showing that he has learned from bitter experience not to sound too optimistic about inflation. What I think is funny about that is that there's actually people who believe that. I think Chairman Powell is intentionally and on purpose using the right words to send the right message that he wants to send. It's all an opinion anyway, but he is really good at talking to the markets. If he wants the markets to go down or the markets go up, he wants to be positive. He wants to be negative. He wants to set expectations. He's actually really good at it. I will give him that. He's been a good federal Fed chairman. Alan Greenspan, who was Fed chairman in the 80s, and I believe some of the 90s. I remember when, as a young advisor, you would he would talk in another language using words that you would sit there and you go, okay, what did he mean by that word? He would use this big word that you've maybe heard a couple of times in your life, and you're trying to interpret it. So anyway, that's gone off on a rabbit trail. But there you have it. That's just my opinion. We'll see as this continues to work itself out. And but we just this was the week that we got the big inflation numbers. We'll wait and see what next week holds. I do know for sure that it feels like, maybe with the exception of automobile prices, definitely restaurants, definitely grocery stores, things have kind of stabled out and are higher than they normally would be. And I don't know, maybe it's there to stay. Maybe it'll go down a little bit more. This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. Listen, if you ever missed the program, or you were unaware that we do post every Prudent Money Radio Show as a podcast, and you can go on Apple, you can go on Spotify, you can go on any major podcast platform, wherever you like to consume podcast content, and you can listen to the program. You can also listen at prudentmoney.com, and if you do sign up on the email newsletter list, we'll let you know exactly when we'll send out an email and let you know when we've posted the program for the day. And usually it's right after we get done here at 3:30. So that's all at the website, prudentmoney.com. Just want to make sure that I know there's a lot of people who listen to the podcast, which I appreciate, and just want to make sure you know about it. So where is debt the most delinquent? What state has the highest number of delinquent debt, and who has the least amount of delinquent debt? Now, when we talk about the most and the least, the most is Mississippi, which doesn't surprise me, which is 12% of debt, personal debt, is delinquent. And these are the kind of numbers that an analyst really do focus on when there's any kind of a question of, are we heading towards a recession? Not enough real information that's out there that's calling for that. I mean, all the indicators that were calling for that was, seemed like a year to year and a half ago, and they've stopped actually calling for a recession. Go figure. So the number one state is Mississippi. Where do you think Texas is? The 50th is Iowa. Let's go down the list to the top 10. Mississippi, Louisiana, that doesn't surprise me, Alabama. Arkansas at number 4, a little surprising. West Virginia, not surprising. They've, believe it or not, some of these states that you wouldn't think actually have some big financial problems. Oklahoma, number 6. 7, Delaware. Don't know much about Delaware. Number 8, South Carolina. Don't know much about South Carolina. Kentucky, definitely at number 9. And here is the surprise at number 10. The great state of Texas is number 10 on the most delinquent loan debt that's most delinquent. And once again, not to make a big deal about it, it's only 6%. But in relation to the other 50 states, 49 states, I would not expect Texas to be number 10. They're usually, when Wallet Hub does these surveys, it's usually kind of, you find Texas in the middle of the pack. Now, I bring this up because I can only imagine that there's a lot of people listening who are struggling to stay current with debt. If there's one piece of advice that I can give when it comes to debt, and it's becoming tougher and tougher with credit card debt because the interest rates are so high, is to make sure that you stay current. Because when you are not current with your debt and it goes into default or goes delinquent, a whole series of actions occur or consequences occur that take you from being in okay shape one day to really bad shape the next day. And once you go there, it's tough to climb back, and it has a residue effect for a very long time. I don't think that most people realize the consequences that occur once you allow a debt to go into default or delinquent. So whatever you got to do, extra job, extra hours working, keep that current, because it's only a season. This is Bob Brooks. If you got a question for me, please go to the website at prudentmoney.com and send it in, because we are all out of time. Till we do meet again next time, keep the faith and have a great rest of the day.
That's all the time we have for today. Questions or comments for Bob, or to find out more great information like what you've just heard, visit www.prudentmoney.com. Be sure to join Bob Brooks again for the next edition of Prudent Money.